Twitless, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about the anticipated Superman trailer by James Gunn, the relaunch of the DC cinematic universe. We're also pairing that with a very famous relaunch in the comics by John Byrne, the Man of Steel, a retelling of Superman's origins, starting with Jor-El on Krypton, and then going through very quickly through Superman's early years in Smallville, and then ending with his debut as Superman saving lives. And so there's definitely some interesting overlap between this comic and what we see in this trailer, although there are some interesting points of difference as well. But this is definitely an attempt at a return to form for Superman. It's definitely a tonal shift for the DC universe, and there's a lot of discussion about there being a lot riding on this particular trailer and film because the superhero genre has flagged in recent years, has been waning, according to many. The DC universe, of course, has had many false starts, hasn't been able to find its footing. And so there's a lot of anticipation for it. Personally, I have a lot of investment in this as a longtime watcher of Superman media from the Fleischer cartoons, the animated series, films, and comics. So I have a personal stake in seeing this aspirational character come to life again. So I'm looking forward to see what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'd like to begin by talking about the trailer. So, everybody, what did you actually think? Give me your initial impression once you saw the trailer for the first time.
You know, honestly, frankly, I've been excited about this teaser drop because I wanted to see what, given that there's a lot riding on this for superheroes as a genre for film, but in particular for DC, like Twitless already brought up, I was excited to see what they were going to do with this, and it feels confident. It doesn't feel like it has to explain or excuse its presence. It's taking risks and assuming that you're gonna go along with those risks, that it's gonna be able to earn them. It's introducing some strange little element. James Gunn is known for adding, super animals to a franchise and actually pulling it off. It's been done with Guardians of the Galaxy, and he clearly thinks he can do it here. And he might be able to pull it off again. Like I'm actually, I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing.
My take was that the trailer is definitely Superman in spirit, and it actually delivered on a lot of what I wanted to see from this initial outing from James Gunn. It clearly has his tonal flavor on it. You can see there's a lot of use of music. You can expect probably a soundtrack to accompany the film that is going to be memorable, just like his efforts on Guardians of the Galaxy were. He's leaving his signature all over this property, and rightly so. I think it needed an infusion of new life and energy, an interesting perspective. But what's really important here, and I think what really everybody is anticipating, did he capture the true essence of Superman? We just went through the Zack Snyderverse iteration. Everybody loved Henry Cavill as Superman, but it did get a lot of criticism for its dark tones and its harsh take on the character. And really, there was a huge outpouring of fan desire to have it return back to the Donner spirit, back to the hope and optimism that we're very familiar with from the iconic character. Twitless, what did you think of James Gunn's interpretation of Man of Steel?
So this is going to sound so non-committal, but but I've heard several people kind of fall on this particular opinion, which is I don't know yet. I feel like the trailer was on a knife's edge of either understanding the assignment properly or failing at it. And it really is going to be the execution. One thing I
Mm,
think a trailer does is I think a trailer helps establish the goals, essentially, the sort of, goals that a film is trying to hit or make. Um, and so this film clearly is trying to be aspirational. So we see those goals. The film is trying to be a little more fun, even a little more humorous. And so you can see in the trailer those little things like when you see the dog show up, when Crypto shows up. That's been talked about quite a bit. Crypto's more of a Silver Age character who's a little more on the humorous or silly side. And so bringing that in kind of signals kind of what kind of markers and things that James Gunn wants to kind of hit He also wants to hit some some heavy action. We see a glimpse of a giant CGI monster, something that we've seen in Guardians quite a bit in the MCU. So we're definitely going to have some big spectacle, and then some romance. There's some kissies going on between Lois and Superman in the trailer, so you can kind of see the sort of goals that he's trying to hit. But overall, the heart he's trying to capture is this very noble, aspirational character who inspires not just people in America but across the globe. And those are the kinds of things where it's really going to be about the execution. Is he going to stick the landing on this? Is it going to veer off into? I think there's some rumors about or I've seen some buzz about I think Tom King having a hand in some of the writing. That's got some people concerned. Tom King puts a lot of emotion and pathos in writing, but he also tends to undermine and deconstruct characters, and that's not something that we want to see going on for Superman. We don't need another deconstructive take on this character. So, like I said, trailer for me, I'm on the fence. It's. I see the where this film wants to go. It's going to be how well can it be executed on.
I just want to add that I honestly, like, I was thinking about, Garfield's Spider-Man and how a lot of people our age were more skeptical of that take, but how positively that was received by a younger generation, and how that really kinda scooped up Spider-Man and reclaimed him as a real forefront character again out of the so that it wouldn't just be like a 2000s era Sam Raimi version. Uh, and I'm thinking I had to see Superman in his 20s before I realized that I think he's been sold to us as millennials for a while, which is fine, but I really think there's gonna have to be, teens see seeing Superman with the broccoli top actually kinda makes sense. I have to be humble enough to admit that younger people are gonna have to be excited about Superman
Mhm.
at all for him to not just be a museum piece that we're, like, looking at as a legacy character. He's gotta feel fresh, he's gotta look like someone that our kids want to be excited about, and so it's kind of fun to see a decidedly younger Superman. That's actually kind of interesting. That feels like a confident risk. It doesn't feel like an arbitrary one, it feels like a strategic one made by sensible people who want to do something that a younger generation are gonna lash onto.
I'm going to commit to my take on this trailer, and I'm going to say that I actually liked it quite a bit. I'm pretty much sold.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to see the heart of Superman portrayed by James Gunn's representation. I didn't want to see some edge lord alien figure of some Uberman that just comes, crashing down, made out of metal, and just annihilates everything. I wanted to see vulnerability. I wanted to see heart. I wanted to see familial attributes that support the character, reinforce his strength, give him grounding. And I was seeing all of that. Him showing vulnerability in the beginning. He's defeated. James Gunn actually released a statement explaining a little bit of this trailer, which I've never seen done before. He says, "We do have a battered Superman in the beginning. That is our country. I believe in the goodness of human beings, and I believe that most people in this country, despite their ideological beliefs, their politics, are doing their best to get by and be good people, despite what it may seem like to the other side, no matter what that other side might be. This movie is about that. It's about the basic kindness of human beings and that it can be seen as uncool and under siege. Some of the darker voices are some of the louder voices." So he wants to put at the forefront, elevate the positivity, the hope that Superman embodies that was very effectively conveyed, I think, in this trailer. He immediately sought help from his closest companion, a playful dog, which is perfect for a James Gunn framing. As you mentioned, Matt C, he loves to include animals in his films. I wanted to see a James Gunn flavoring of the Superman heart and soul that we're very accustomed to, because I think that is the unique perspective that this character needs. I did not want to see the Donner film attempted on screen again. We remember what happened with the last time that was done with the Return of Superman, and it was just not clicking with audiences. You can't capture magic in a bottle twice. It's a once in a lifetime event, and we had it with the Donner iteration, and now we need to just move on and find this generation's representation of the same soul of that character that we love.
Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, and a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
Modern day, classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl, issues 1 through 5, now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video.
So I'm a little concerned though, because battering Superman is something you got to be very careful about doing. It has to be handled very deliberately and without undermining the character, because Superman is meant to be unbatterable. So when you batter him, it needs to be usually at the climax of a story. It needs to be at a particular point in a narrative, because Superman is largely supposed to be invulnerable. And so vulnerability for him is something that has to be handled very interesting for someone who's so invincible. You have to handle it delicately, because if you make Superman too delicate, if you make him too much like tissue paper, then it undermines the whole point, right? So the point of a knight in shining armor is to be that knight in shining armor. And if you dent the armor too much, you kind of lose the point of the knight at a certain point. And so Superman is a knight. It's very much in line with what he's meant to be as an archetype, and he's supposed to be kind of impenetrable to an extent. And so it's something again. It's I see the goals. And to me, it's going to be all about the execution. Can you pull this off, or is it going to be the Tom King sort of like he's weepy, or he's way too emotional, he's too vulnerable, he's too easily battered? Because then, like I said, it's Superman. If you take a look at the some of the covers for the John Byrne, as we transition to talk a little bit more about the comic, you can see just him, burying his chest to see the S symbol, and how often that is just a symbol of, come at me, bro, pull out your guns, because they're not going to do squat. And that is also part of the spirit of Superman, because he is human, he is emotionally vulnerable, but he's also supposed to be hella strong and hella very, very impervious to most harm. It's supposed to take something very, very significant to even break a sweat for this guy. And that's why we like him.
Actually, what's very interesting about this Man of Steel comic, as we compare it back to the James Gunn trailer that we just saw, is it too is a reimagining of sorts of the character. It retells the origin differently. And the thing that penetrates him most effectively are things that damage his emotional core, his sense of security, his sense of confidence in humanity and the goodness of the people around him. He's vulnerable inside because he's good, and that goodness is constantly challenged. So I enjoyed reading through this book after seeing the trailer. I thought it gave a very nice contrast of what this character has gone through over the years in the comics, and now is going through in the cinematic universe. Uh, there's been several attempts for each creator, John Byrne in this case, to come in and internalize what it is to be this character, what he means to the audience, to the reader, and to give their unique take and perspective in the stories that they craft for him.
Yeah, I found it interesting, just piggybacking on what Twitless said. I never thought of Man of Steel really being a euphemism in a way for a knight until this moment, but it's so clear. This We're saying so much more than just uh, a reference to a type of metal. Uh, it's I found this comic really fascinating. I was actually kind of shocked, having only read Superman comics from the 2000s and onwards. I've never read something this far back, and this is not a Superman I'm familiar with. It was really interesting to see Superman admit fear and admit anger, emotional vulnerabilities, like we said, like even in a in a number one, and yet he never felt like he wasn't the person you wanted him to be, like that he couldn't be that Man of Steel, he couldn't be that knight on behalf of humanity. It was deeply and profoundly um, a a very positive take, but it was very rich. It didn't feel very thin. So I was encouraged by that. What one thing that and I'd be interested in what you guys think. I always struggle with Krypton, and I continue to struggle with it. It with this Man of Steel because I don't quite get. I feel like there's a strong story element that I'm always missing as to why Krypton has to be this tragic backstory element, why it has to fail so that Superman could live on um, as Krypton's legacy, but also the hero of humanity. And they just kind of I don't know how integral this is to his story, but this idea that he comes from a planet that has like sterilized themselves in a way that they deserve to be judged cosmically by their own planet because I mean they've lost their own quote humanity in a sense the Kryptonians have, and somehow the story in Man of Steel number one here is, as I understand it, is that it takes a Kryptonian on Earth to rediscover humanity in that general sense, that ethical sense. He has to rediscover a Kryptonian's humanity by growing up on Earth, where that connecting with the land, connecting with the raw um, heroic power, I guess, that humanity has here on Earth. Like he has to be raised by that and dirtied and mixed up in the middle of it in order to be our champion, but also to kind of redeem Krypton's legacy. Does that jive at all with your sense of what Superman is supposed to be doing?
So it's interesting that you bring that up because Man of Steel is a reboot. It's a reimagining. It comes off the tail of Alan Moore doing essentially his version of the final Superman story. Whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, and that's basically the end of the previous epoch of Superman stories. And definitely, a swan song from all the way back from the Silver Age through a little bit after that. And what's interesting there is that this, in a sense, was meant to be an edgy reimagining of the time. This is 1986. This was the we're gonna go a little harder on this. And so
Okay.
if you go back to like the Silver Age for Krypton, Krypton was very much like Earth. They just had magic technology. They were very human like us, and they were in love with each other. And Superman would go back in time sometimes and visit Krypton and fall in love with somebody, and then oh, I want to get married on Krypton, but then boof, he's back to the present, and then he'd cry and be like, oh, I left a love on Krypton. So he would have these fanciful adventures with the doomed civilization. Krypton has always been the doomed civilization, just like um, Batman's parents, Tom and Martha Wayne, are doomed. They're essentially like Uncle Ben for Peter Parker. It is a canon moment that helps spur the orphan child to be the superhero. It's that sort of fairy tale kind of setup there. And so it always needs to be doomed, but the way it's doomed has definitely been reinterpreted here. And so, like I said, this is supposed to be a little bit of an edgier take, and so we get a Krypton that is not just doomed, but kind of almost has it coming. There's some hubris there, and we see Jor-El just briefly reconnect with humanity and actually say, "Actually, Laura, I love you," and that's kind of strange for us Kryptonians to say to each other. But you'll notice that in this version, which actually like how Byrne, and this has got some wonderful Byrne artwork, by the way, very iconic artwork,
Oh yeah.
and just the final splash image of Superman is just perfect. And but this version of Jor-El, this particular alien look for Krypton is meant to look strange. It's supposed to look unnerving. I remember when I looked at some of these Kryptonians when I was a kid, I always thought they looked kind of scary. I didn't like them. And Byrne, I think, is channeling a little bit of just that foreign, just uncomfortable uh, feeling. We're supposed to not, we're not really supposed to feel a great connection to Krypton because we're leaving that spot. And there's, like I said, there's something kind of wrong with their society. But this is something that Byrne is actually bringing to the table. And I want to go back to something that you brought up earlier, Well Read, which is the idea of um, Superman kind of being reinterpreted for each new generation, and this new trailer being, kind of a new generation Superman. Obviously, Superman has been reinvented many times. There's Superman Birthright by Mark Waid, which was meant to be more of a 2000s reimagining for the character. But even in this version by John Byrne, at the letter that's kind of included at the very end, there's kind of a note from Byrne himself where he talks about when he was first introduced to Superman. He says Superman began with this I think the George Reeve television show. And he says, now I know that for most of you, it actually started way earlier or in, different, with the Siegel and Schuster. That's factually where Superman began. But he said, for me, it began at this point because this is where I was introduced to the character. And this is kind of my history with Superman. And so Byrne acknowledges the fact of what you just mentioned, which is that different people connect with this character at different times with different pieces of media and then end up making something their own. And so Man of Steel is Byrne's take on it. The thing that I think is interesting is how well Byrne, even though he's breaking new ground with the character, he really is channeling so much of what has come previously in terms of the heart of the character that the new stuff that he creates becomes iconic itself. And people will point to this run as being definitive. This is the definitive Superman for many people. So I think that's a fascinating relationship.
The most interesting part for me about this story is that it's a slow burn, and it takes its time to establish a lot of that heart. The entire introduction on Krypton ends at the point where, as you mentioned, that they are rediscovering the sense of love that has been lost on that planet, where all coupling is essentially pre-planned, and that is meant to lay the groundwork and plant the seeds for the theme of Superman throughout the majority of the rest of the issue. That uh, human, the essence of humanity, and what makes us who we are is a universal quality, and that how we feel love and how we feel connections and how we long to have those supports and those bonds in our lives is not just unique to our little speck of dust in the universe, that it's transcends space-time and could even be present in other worlds. So these are very much qualities of nature and fundamental fundamental laws that all living creatures must abide by to one degree or another. So that is what I think Superman truly embodies, is the carrying forward of that essence and the spirit, and seeing it challenged in unfamiliar and alien settings here on Earth. So, Twitless, give us your final take on the Superman trailer.
I think it's really interesting to read Man of Steel in pairing with the trailer because I actually think that, and this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about this being a definitive version of Superman. I think people like James Gunn may be, I'm not certain on this, but it would not surprise me if Man of Steel was his version of Superman, that era. And either John Byrne or later on Dan Jurgens and so on, because there's certain elements that I could tell from that era of Superman that show up in the trailer. How Superman is a little, we show emotional vulnerability. We show how the public aren't always in love with him. There's that someone sort of throws a can at Superman's head. But still him being kind of aspirational, not super dark and edgy, as we've seen in a lot of post 9/11 comics. Also, the fact that Guy Gardner shows up and some of the other JLA members show up, very Dan Jurgens era, to have those people just kind of pop up and be in the mix. And so even the hairstyle that we see when he decides to become Clark Kent, he kind of combs his hair back, makes it look kind of, frizzy a little bit. I even think that we get a sort of modern interpretation of that with this trailer. But so I think there's several elements that either They maybe not directly connected to Man of Steel, but I could definitely see some maybe subconscious influences coming from it. Um, so again, this comic, definite recommend. If you haven't read this one already, haven't read this series, go out and read it. It'll be a very significant read for you. I definitely think it's better than All Star Superman, although that one gets brought up as a not only an influence for this trailer, but also for a lot of other Superman stories. Man of Steel is great. The trailer really is for me a we'll see. I am tentatively optimistic. Big Superman fan over here. Um, I'm currently reading Joshua Williamson's run on Superman and even some Action Comics. So I'm keeping abreast of some other Superman stories. So I'm hopeful we're going to get something good here, but it's going to depend on the execution. James Gunn can do some really deconstructive things. We've seen some of his work on other franchises, and he likes to lampoon stuff. And Superman's a character who doesn't really need any more lampooning. Definitely not in this relaunch. So I'm hoping that he understood the assignment. That this is the time to inspire.
Metzi.
Yeah, I feel like Gunn is offering us something that feels like it's confident. It has a particular voice, and it feels that it knows why it's showing up with the voice that it does have. It's going to justify itself without apologizing, which I think for like whether he hits it out of the park or not remains to be seen. But it's going to take that level of confidence, I think, to resell Superman after so many mixed takes over the last decades really, but particularly over the last 10 years on the big screen. And it's going to take that level of confidence to sell the DC universe, I think, and superheroes in general. So it's a tall order. It's going to take a lot of confidence. It's going to take serious risks. The sort of risks that honestly that I read in Man of Steel, which is kind of fun. If you want to see John Byrne have Superman, just at a loss, like these people, they clung to me like maggots. If you want to hear that kind of dialogue coming from Superman, uh, but in the context, it works really well. It feels a little edgy, I guess, for its time for a mid '80s version. But the overwhelming context, the larger context, is that this really is a knight fighting for humanity. If you want that kind of confidence and risk taking, uh, by all means, please read The Man of Steel, and hopefully we get that this summer as well on the big screen.
I enjoyed The Man of Steel. It was a slow burn, as I mentioned, but a welcome reimagining and a significant achievement for its time. And one of many great reimaginings of the character that retained the pure essence of that IP. I also felt that with James Gunn trailer. I felt like he understood the essence. He captured it on film. The one area we didn't touch on, we mentioned briefly, is that he is shoving a lot of the DC universe into this trailer, and there are a lot of JLA appearances, which might deviate a little bit from the main track here, the main mission, which is reestablish the purity that we lost of the Man of Steel, and bring him back home, as he says to Crypto. Bring Superman back home to us.
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.